I've made no secret about my disappointment with the newer God of War games. The series has transformed from a brutal mythological power fantasy into something quieter and more introspective. The newer games are polished, emotional, and widely praised, but for me, they lost something essential. They're not bad, they're just not the same blood-soaked, rage-fueled power fantasies that made me fall in love with the series. Cory Barlog, director of the 2018 God of War reboot, once said that the Greek games reflected who the team were at the time and the games they wanted to play. The Norse games, by contrast, represent where they are in life now, which is why some fans affectionately call them Dad of War. I'm opening with this because I think it neatly frames the differences between the Greek games and the newer ones. It also gets to the core of what I don't like about them. I'll admit, it's an interesting premise, taking a character like Kratos and making him vulnerable. But to me, that's fundamentally not what God of War is, or at least not what I want from it. I know I'm probably in the minority here, but I've got kids, and when I sit down to unwind, I don't really want to deal with father-son drama and what used to be my escapist power fantasy. For me, God of War 3 represents the pinnacle of the series, the studio's magnum opus, their Mount Olympus if you will. Santa Monica Studio has made good games since, no doubt, but compared to what they achieved with the third game, they feel more like experiments to me. So, along with this video being a love letter to what I consider the greatest God of War game, I want to take a look at how the team pulled it off. I'll talk about the earlier titles and how the series has evolved, why you should play it today, and ultimately why I think this is the best God of War game to date. It should come as no surprise that the first God of War was a massive success. While being largely conventional on the gameplay front, it pushed the boundaries of cinematic presentation and adult content in video games. It took inspiration from films such as Gladiator and the 1980s Clash of the Titans, but leaned more into the ridiculous than the historically accurate. Its operatic tone and exaggerated sense of scale helped it stand apart from its contemporaries. On the gameplay front, it was influenced by games like 1989's Strider and Onimusha, with game director David Jaffe being quoted as saying about Onimusha, "Let's do that, but with Greek mythology." The team also looked at the tight, combo-driven combat of Devil May Cry when designing Kratos' moveset. Early on, the team briefly considered creating a first-person game. However, the success of titles such as Devil May Cry persuaded the team that third person was the way to go, as it would better showcase the scale of the environments and create more opportunities for a cinematic experience. Technically, the game was a showcase for the PS2, squeezing impressive visuals out of the aging hardware. Its enormous boss battles were designed to feel like playable movie set pieces, and the blend of combat, platforming, environmental puzzles, and relentless pace was highly distinctive at the time. On release in 2005, it went on to receive critical acclaim and some serious bank too, earning numerous Game of the Year awards and selling millions of copies worldwide. In fact, so confident was Santa Monica Studio that they had a hit on their hands, pre-production on the sequel began before the game was even released. God of War 2 was directed by Cory Barlog, who would later return to helm the 2018 reboot. Before that, he served as a lead animator on the original and also contributed to the story. David Jaffe stepped back into a creative director role for the sequel, allowing Barlog to fully take the reins, while helping to maintain continuity between the two titles. Released in 2007, after the PlayStation 3 had already launched, it became one of the final major first-party showcases for the PS2. It was another huge success for Santa Monica Studio. It may not have outsold the original, but it is regarded by many as the superior game. Everything about it feels amplified. Bigger levels, bigger bosses, bigger set pieces, and a story that escalates from personal revenge to full-blown war against Olympus itself. Technically, it pushes the PS2 to its absolute limits. It added more detailed environments, improved lighting, and larger enemy counts. The scale of some of the levels is just nuts, and many have cited it as one of the most technically impressive titles ever released on the system. On top of the scale, combat is more fluid and varied, and the puzzles and platforming feel more organically woven into the action, instead of functioning as separate segments. And then there's the ending. It ends on a ridiculously epic cliffhanger that sets up the equally ridiculously epic intro of the third game. God of War 2 isn't just a great sequel, it's one of the most impressive games from the PS2 era. Even today it holds up remarkably well and is essential gaming for fans of the series. I wanted to quickly shout out the PSP games too, mainly because if I don't, someone will chime in the comments about how I forgot to mention them. Although these didn't have much influence over the third game, especially Ghost of Sparta, which came out the same year but later, they are considered canon in the story, with Ghost of Sparta's version of Kratos in particular laying the groundwork for the more emotionally complex Kratos that we'd see in future titles. Directed by Stig Asmussen, who would go on to direct the Star Wars Jedi games at Respawn, God of War 3 had some mighty big sandals to fill. Not only did it follow in the footsteps of the incredible second game, but it was also the first new game in the series to be released on the PS3. Cory Barlog was originally the creative director before leaving early in development to pursue other interests. This was initially a big blow for the studio and could have easily been seen as a sign of a project in trouble. It kinda just sounds like he was burnt out in God of War though, and had the opportunity to do something more interesting. And thankfully, despite the initial shock, the team was able to get back on track pretty quickly. Incidentally, the thing that was more interesting was working with George Miller on a Mad Max game. So yeah, I reckon he gets a pass. The PS3 presented plenty of exciting opportunities, but an equal number of hurdles. Understanding the system's potential was a mammoth task, and although the platform allowed for a level of detail well beyond what had previously been possible, everything took exponentially longer. God of War 3 is built using an upgraded version of the engine that the previous two games used, but with many more features. This resulted in a significantly more visually impressive game. So much so that all the cinematics were created using the in-game engine instead of CGI. It's an important game on the PS3 from a technology point of view because of how it makes use of the PS3's Cell Broadband engine. It wasn't the first game on the PS3 to use the hardware in this way, but Santa Monica Studios' implementation is often cited as a high-profile example of how developers leverage the Cell to help with graphics computations. Alongside this, a new type of anti-aliasing was developed with the help of Sony Technology Group, called Morphological Anti-Aliasing, or MLAA. God of War 3 was the first game to use it, but it wasn't long before it made its way into other titles, such as Killzone 3 and Motorstorm Apocalypse. Both games I've reviewed, by the way. One of the big innovations, pun intended, is the scale of the levels and that they can move, such as the battle with Kronos. Level design of this type and on this scale was previously impossible on the PS2 because there was nowhere near enough memory. The developers clearly had a field day with what was possible on the PS3. Multiplayer was considered early in development, but was ultimately dropped because the team wanted to focus on the story. A decision they would revisit and most likely came to regret with their next game, God of War Ascension. Again, I have a video on that too if you want the full lowdown. At launch in 2010, God of War 3 was a major commercial success, selling over 1 million copies in the US within its first month. It received universal acclaim and remains the third best-selling game in the series behind the two Norse games. It once again set the benchmark for cinematic action games, and it stands as one of the most technically impressive games on the platform. In 2015, it was remastered to help mark the series' 10th anniversary, and undoubtedly keep the series front of mind while the reboot was being worked on. The remaster was handled by Wholesale Algorithms, and as of the making of this video, it's the only game in the Greek series to be brought to the PS4/PS5. It sold similar numbers to the PS3 release, but clearly not enough to convince Sony to re-release any of the other Greek games. The best they've been able to manage in the decade since is a montage tribute and this lame controller which celebrated the 20th anniversary. There is a however here that I'm going to come back to. The story is what makes this an S-tier God of War game for me. The scale is immense, and there are so many awesome iconic characters. It also doesn't get bogged down with long exposition or superfluous detail. It wastes no time, getting straight to the point, giving you just enough to understand what's going on and keep the rage level at maximum. It picks up right at the end of the second game, introducing us to one of the main antagonists. As usual, Kratos basically has beef with everyone, even characters he's never met before. He's supremely pissed and determined to not let anyone or anything get in his path of destruction. He's absolutely ruthless in this game. You'll be chopping down innocents by the boatload, including a couple of situations where he almost goes out of his way to kill people that could be easily saved. Some of the ways he dispatches the bosses are extremely gruesome, and these sequences go on for way longer than you'd expect. I've played plenty of violent games since this came out, and even though I'd already played it, this replay was still shocking. It's not just violence for violence sake though. I mean, it is, but what I mean is it all feeds into the central theme of him being the angriest man to exist, and it provides the motivation and context for his rage. Honestly, I find this really cathartic, and yeah, I know that probably makes me sound like a sociopath, but it's also absurd and over the top. It's a stylized macho power fantasy, and if you don't take it too seriously, I think it provides the kind of escapism the newer games have lost. God of War 3 was designed to be the final game in the Greek saga, and it doesn't end on a cliffhanger, although it doesn't close the door on a sequel entirely. Ironically, the next game, Ascension, doesn't continue the story at all, choosing to go down the prequel path. Without going into spoilers, God of War 3 does end on a reasonably satisfying note, even if it doesn't neatly tie up every story thread. So, this is the PS4 remaster, which is currently the definitive way to play it. It can of course be played on the PS5 and PS5 Pro, although the benefits are fairly minimal. Faster load times, the frame rate might be a fraction more stable, and the image is again only slightly sharper. It includes all the extras from the PS3 game, such as the behind the scenes stuff and the paid DLC. The only new addition is a photo mode. It's disappointing that nothing else was added. Some additional behind the scenes content, like how they made the remaster, or maybe even including the remastered PS2 games would have been great. It's completely wild to me that, up until now, it's been impossible to play the older games on current hardware. In some regions you can stream the PS2 games via PS Plus Premium, but yeah, what the fuck, Sony? Now, as I was putting this video together, a remake of the original Greek trilogy was confirmed. And from the little we know, I am already on the hype train. It's sad that Ascension is being ignored, but hey, beggars can't be choosers at this point. Anyway, I digress. Both the PS3 game and the remaster target 60 frames per second, although the PS3 version rarely hits that. It's funny, I don't remember it being so variable when I played it back in the day, although I'm much more of a stickler for performance now. Otherwise, it's identical across all platforms in terms of gameplay and playable content. What makes this such an enjoyable game is the mixture of puzzles and combat. The two are combined more often than in the earlier games, and there are some creative solutions that are super fun to figure out. I still think Ascension has the best puzzles in the series with its time reversal mechanic, but the blend of action and problem solving here is more cohesive than the PS2 and PSP games. The pacing is relentless, the story is great, and the combat is, in my opinion, the best in the series. But there are a couple of things that don't hold up so well. The platforming, for example, is a bit mixed. I like how it's often used in environmental puzzles, such as using hot air in your wings to get to higher platforms. The climbing sections, though, still suck ass. Like these bits where you hang from the ceiling, they just feel clunky as hell. At least they're not as redundant as the climbing in the Norse games is, or modern gaming in general for that matter. I'm not a huge fan of these flying sections either. They looked incredible back on the PS3, but they really haven't aged well. They essentially boil down to finding a tiny hole to thread Kratos through, and some of these sections go on forever. It's got nothing on the flying Pegasus sections from the second game. Like the earlier titles, it's pretty challenging. On normal, you're expected to have mastered the fundamentals very early on. Even the first boss, which you essentially fight during the game's introduction, doesn't pull any punches, forcing you to utilize all of Kratos' toolkit. As you unlock new weapons and abilities, you'll be switching between them constantly. Certain enemies are weak to specific attacks, and some abilities are stronger in specific situations. You could probably stick with one weapon and ability the whole time, but the game does a great job of encouraging you to mix things up. The boss fights are the real highlight. The scale, the variety, the violence. The Kronos battle in particular stands out because of its immense size and spectacle. Honestly, the only one that feels a bit underwhelming is the final boss. It's not bad by any means, it just feels kind of basic compared to the others. After you finish it, you unlock Chaos Mode, and to attempt this you really need to have figured out the max damage combos, the finer points of crowd control, and which weapons, magic, and abilities to use in specific situations. Finishing the game gives you access to the treasures menu too, which has a ton of behind the scenes content. There are new costumes as well, which have various stat changes for use with new playthroughs. These are included in the remaster, but were paid DLC on the PS3. Also for use in new playthroughs are the various items hidden throughout the game that do stuff like maxing out health and magic meters and how many red orbs you earn. It is a short game, hence all the stuff to incentivize repeat playthroughs, and it feels even shorter due to its breakneck pacing. You can beat it in around 8 to 10 hours, and the abundance of save points makes it an easy game to consume in 20-minute increments. If you're a fan of the Norse games, how much you'll enjoy this one depends on what you're looking for. Do you want a tighter 8 to 10 hour experience or something longer and more substantial? Are you into unlocking gear that changes your stats? And do you prefer a serious, heartfelt story or something where you can check your brain at the door? In my opinion, if you want a sad dad game, there are plenty of others to choose from. And I'm not opposed to them. The Last of Us is one of my favourite games ever. But like The Last of Us Part 2, I think the newer God of War games stray too far from the DNA of what came before. The stories they tell aren't inherently bad, they're just told using characters I think are ill-fitted to that narrative. It would be like turning the Fast and Furious into a musical. Actually, I take that back, that sounds incredible. Maybe I'm just nostalgic, but the fact that the original God of War games are getting remade shows that I'm not the only one who misses the unhinged, over-the-top Kratos energy. Before the remake arrives, I honestly think that God of War 3 is the perfect warm-up. It holds up incredibly well and showcases exactly what makes the Greek game so iconic. Yes, you could argue it's misogynistic or a caricature of masculinity, but that's sort of the point. And I think that's also why the Greek games work as an experience distinct from the more introspective, narrative-driven reboot. Put simply, playing it now gives you context for the character's evolution, shows the full scale of his Greek saga, and builds hype for what the remake will bring back. It's ridiculous, it's violent, like holy shit is it violent, and this is why, to me, it represents peak God of War.